Great. Okay. So we are here with Abdul Hammoud. Is it? Is that correct
That's right.
pronunciation?
Yeah. I mean, you can get technical about it. It's
Great.
Abdurrahman Riyad
So
Muhammad Khalil Muhammad Hammoud, but Abdul's fine.
fair enough. We'll stick with Abdul then.
Yeah.
Less of a thing for me to remember. Yeah. So obviously you're a poet from Australia. First Australian poet on the channel. So congratulations. For the purposes of people watching who don't know who you are, could you introduce yourself?
So my name is Abdul Hammoud. I am a poet based in Melbourne, Australia, originally from Lebanon, in the Middle East. I've been performing since I was 18, so that's 4 years now. So that makes me 22 for anybody who's bad at math. And I've been writing since as long as I can remember. So that's kind of my biography in a nutshell.
Fair enough. Cool. I can see there's a slight bit of lag. I think you're probably staring at me for 10 seconds and waiting for me to talk, but I
That's
suppose that's
okay.
what happens when you
You're
plan
pretty, so
an
it
interview
works
half
out.
an hour away. Yeah. So you said you've been writing for as long as you can remember, but how did you get started in spoken word specifically? What did that journey look like for you?
So I was writing raps before that since I was like maybe 9, 10 years old, and a friend of mine just I'm assuming he was the same, and then he just randomly sent me. I think we were having a chat about the topic of rap and where it's going and who we like and what artists we like and all that kind of stuff. And then he told me to check this out, and he sent me a video from Def Poetry Jam, which is pretty big on YouTube for anybody who does like spoken word. And I saw Reeves, his name was. He was the first poet I ever watched, and or spoken word artist I ever watched. And I watched that, and I just thought, wow, like he's not rhyming. There's no particular form. There's no like. It's so different to anything that I've ever considered to be close to what I think is poetry, like to what I think is art, which was rap in my case. So I thought, hey, maybe I can do that. And I mean, I sat and watched Def Poetry for hours. Like I pretty much cleaned out the whole system. And then once I'd kind of gotten my fill and I'd sponged everything up, I decided, cool, maybe it's about time for me to try this myself. So I put pen to paper and I started off terribly. This was when I was about 16. And yeah, I was horrible. And I turned 18 and I performed at the Victoria, like one of the Victoria heats for the Australian Poetry Slam, and sucked. Well, I think I sucked. Other people would have you believe I did okay. I still think I sucked. And so it was kind of a growing experience from there where I just wanted to kind of get better at the performance and the writing aspect of it. And so here we are 4 years later, where I think I'm a little bit better than I was when I was 18.
Yeah, that's wicked. That's always the hope. It's a wicked story of starting out with rap and obviously just people introducing to people spoken word. It's a great thing. I mean, you get people who start out writing, who started writing like just regular poetry. That's actually how
Yeah,
I started. But you also get people who
yeah,
come to it from like the opposite background. It's this great thing about spoken word that it's this place where you can just get this meeting of people from all different kinds of cultural backgrounds who just come together and say, hey,
precisely.
we're talking about real issues in a really realistic and you know honest way, and I think that's
Exactly.
really what resonates with people from all different kinds of walks of life. Um, so when you were more emerging than you are now, did you have any mentor figures that helped you out?
Yes, I mean I had Luca for sure. Luca was a very very good friend. Met him a good maybe year and a half into my progress as a spoken word artist. I definitely wasn't considering taking it seriously then. When this started, it was just a side hobby. It was never something that I wanted to pursue as a career, like as an actual lifetime kind of thing. So I met him way before that, and I saw what he did. I knew of him beforehand. I knew that he won the poetry slam the next year, and yeah, we kind of just talked a little bit about what can be done. And back then, it was kind of unheard of. Like it wasn't. It was for me at least. It was a little bit unheard of for us, for a poet to make it and to make money and to pay rent and that kind of thing. Like to actually live off their craft. Um, so that was interesting. It was very, very interesting to see that there were people who were out there. They hadn't made it, they were about to make it. And that was Luca at the time. And now he has made it, and which is, awesome. So it kind of makes things really, really cool for us, for people like me who are hoping to be on their way to that. So, yeah, he was probably the mentor kind of figure for me.
Yeah. Was there ever any specific piece of advice he gave you that was particularly resonant? Like, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received? Maybe not from him, but just the best advice.
That's a good question. Because you get a lot of advice in this industry. Every time you finish a piece or something like that, someone's got some kind of criticism to offer, like constructive criticism, obviously, to offer. This isn't career advice. This is just writing advice. But the best piece of advice that I got as far as writing was concerned was make editing your best friend. Always, always, always edit. It's the least favorite thing to do, but you have to make it the most favorite thing to do, because it's just so crucial when it comes to poetry. So often we hear poems that are too long, that could have been punchier, that could have been shorter, and these are all things that you would never hear from a poet telling someone just after they get off stage, and it's all love and rainbows then. But after that, if you really do want to further the craft, then there are things that you have to get better at. There are things that you have to practice. That's something I had to come to terms with eventually. And yeah, I realized that editing was something I had to definitely get on board with. So a lot of people were just like, yeah, make sure that you edit that, make sure that you cut it down, make sure that you make it shorter. That could be shorter. Get rid of all of this. And it's like, yeah, you're chopping up your baby. It's not something that I really ever wanted to do. It's like, no, it's perfect as it is, but it's not. So yeah, it was growing from there.
Yeah, that's wicked. I had the same kind of experience when I started out and I was writing these really, really chunky, like 5, 6 minute poems, and it was just, it was not cutting it. It felt like a great story, but it was just a lot of unnecessary words. Um, I was going to ask, what's the best piece of advice you'd give to somebody who's emerging on the scene now? But I imagine it might be pretty similar. But is there any other piece of advice you'd give for people who are starting out now? Perhaps, maybe.
Um, yeah, I mean, I definitely don't give the editing thing. I don't give the editing advice to anybody besides those who have progressed a little bit in this, like people who have done this before, or who are doing it, or whatever it is, or who could actually use the advice. But when it comes to somebody who's new, so I've done like workshops at schools and that kind of thing, and dealt with kids that were anywhere between 8 all the way to adults in their 40s, So anybody who's brand new, I usually like the best and cheesiest and yet most relevant advice to give is try it. Just try it. Whatever you don't think you can do, try it. This is the number of times I've run a workshop where there's at least one person who's sitting in the corner and he's like, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can write. I don't think I want to write. I don't think I could, it's not something I could do. I don't like English. I don't like Shakespeare. It's the range of excuses are endless. And then just telling them, look, for my sake, because you're in my class right now, I want you to try. Because if you don't, then your teacher's going to get mad at you. So just write for my sake and just see what happens, please. And everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has something to say. And those people are usually the ones that end up with some of the most beautiful poetry. So it's always right, like try something different. And for them, it's trying something different. For others who are emerging and who are writing a specific way, like someone who's always rhyming, for example, I'd say try something that doesn't rhyme. For someone who is used to writing long stanzas, I'd say try writing a poem that's like a few words per line. For someone who's used to writing, like we were talking about, 5-6 minute poems, like try writing a haiku. See how you go with a whole bunch of haiku. Just always try something that's completely out of your comfort zone and watch it have a positive effect on you. So that's the best advice that I usually give.
Yeah, it's pretty good advice. I think I'm going to have to try and follow a little bit of that myself. I'm always a little bit conscious. Like sometimes you're in a comfort zone and you don't only always realize you're in it until someone else says, "You know what? You've never done a funny poem. Do a
Yeah,
funny
yeah.
poem for me or something."
I'm still yet to
And you,
do. Yeah.
yeah, still, it's there's always something. There's always more to be gotten out of your writing. You can always be pushed further. You talked a little bit about how when you started, it was unheard of for somebody to make a living out of poetry. Obviously, the Australian scene is different to the UK scene. And perhaps you can talk a little bit about that in this question. But for us, it's been a similar thing. Like it started out with the open mic scenes in the upstairs rooms of pubs and in coffee shops, and it's got to the point now where most major theatres have got a spoken word section in their brochures. And I was wondering, what has it looked like from your perspective, particularly in Australia, moving from that point where poetry was this, really fringe art scene to the point where it is presumably slowly making its way into the mainstream?
So poetry for me here is still a little bit, in my opinion, through my eyes, it's still a little bit of a niche market. It's still finding its way out of the cave, I would say, that it's in, where it's just a whole bunch of poets performing to each other. Um, and trying to word this correctly now. I feel like it's looking for a bit of a shock. It's looking for different poets that have something different to bring to the table that is going to like rock the scene. That's going to give it a bit of a shock. Something that's going to blow up the industry by doing something different. It's that Tupac for the hip hop scene. It's that Kendrick Lamar for the hip hop scene. It's that something completely new, something completely different that nobody's seen yet. That's going to change everything. And there are still those poets that are emerging as part of the poetry scene here. So there's still a lot of amazing people who are emerging and who are going to become so good at what they do over here. I feel like it still might be a little bit, I feel like it might still be a little bit within the constraints of poetry events that poets have run. So I would run a poetry slam and invite people to my poetry slam, and then there's the Australian Poetry Slam, which is the main kind of national poetry slam. But besides that, it's kind of creeping its way into festivals and big shows and that kind of thing. People are experimenting with music, and I think that experimentation with music has made things a lot more mainstream, because now it's not just some get up on the mic and talk kind of thing. It's got music as well, and people love music, and people are willing to introduce themselves to spoken word as long as there's a music background. It's kind of like the training wheels for the general public that haven't been exposed to it yet. Let's give them some music, and then maybe eventually they'll be able to hear something that doesn't have any music in it at all. That's completely a cappella. So yeah, that's what I would say. Like it's got it's a huge amount of growing to do. Like, there's so much growing to do, but it's getting there. It's definitely getting there.
I was wondering if you had any like direct comparisons to make between I don't know how well you know the spoken word scene outside of Australia, but I was wondering if you had anything to say about any differences between Australia and other scenes. I'll say I've noticed some myself actually, because obviously Luca put me in touch with a lot of you guys in Australia, and the response from you guys was immediate. I don't know if there's something about that younger scene that kind of encourages that in people, that makes people more, that urge to collaborate is so much more necessary because you're depending on each other for a lot of the work and for a lot of the gigs. I was wondering if there was anything else you've seen in the Australian scene that you think perhaps is worth talking about compared to other scenes.
So as far as our responses and everything like that, we're eager because it's so young and so new here. A lot of the work that a poet would get would be from other poets. So you really are circulating yourself within the same circle. You just, you're going around within the same kind of friend circle. So as soon as somebody new comes along and says, "I'd like to do this," we jump at it. It's bait in the water, and we're all sharks. We really, really want to be able to break out of our own pond. We really want to get our names out there. We are extremely eager. I don't know about everybody else, but I know I am. Like if somebody presents an opportunity, I check my emails every single day, if not twice a day, just to make sure that I'm on top of anything that comes along, and I respond as quickly as possible so that I make sure that I can lock myself in for that opportunity. So I've found that it's definitely the case for Australian poets because everybody wants to break out of their own comfort zone. Everybody wants to, because it's no longer a comfort zone. It's like all right, I'm done lounging. My legs have atrophied. I want to walk. I want to run. I want to go somewhere else. And that's kind of the Australian scene in a nutshell. In comparison to the States, I mean, I've been to New Zealand and I've been to the US. New Zealand is incredible, and they are kind of the halfway point, I think, between Australia and the US. I don't know if that's offensive, but that's kind of the way I saw it. They really are, because the States, it's a lot more established. So a lot of universities will have their own spoken word teams, and they have a lot of national slams and a lot of they have TED Talks based on that. A lot of them, they have they have a variety of styles over there. So you have everything from your hipster kind of, and then there's the hipster poet, there's the environmentalist poet, then there's the activist poet, then there's the gangster, ex-gangster who is now a literary poet, and then there's this, and there's so many different types of poets there, and so there's an even representation of almost the whole community. Like you got businessmen, you got thugs, you got criminals, you've got people at school, you've got people in middle school, people in high school, people in university. You've got different types of people from all walks of life performing. So I found that over there you get a lot more style, and that's just because it's older there. Like it's been there for a lot longer, so it's kind of matured a little bit. And I can see where New Zealand is, and it's very, very close to that. And I can see where Australia is, and we're close to New Zealand. So it's kind of like a Australia, New Zealand, US timeline kind of thing. Once again, I'm sure that there are a billion people who would call me out on that and say I'm completely wrong and tell me I have no idea what I'm talking about. But that's from my own personal experience traveling to both areas, and that's the way I kind of saw it.
Yeah, that's obviously your opinion has value, and everyone's going to have different opinions, but we're here to try and build a more global picture, and you got to start somewhere. You mentioned that Australian poets are trying to break out of their bubble. We're asking people about whether they feel like part of an international poetry scene. Here in the UK, Europe has a very strong, pretty well networked scene, but we're kind of a little bit detached from that, A, physically, and B, it's just tricky to get over there, and they're kind of quite a self-contained scene compared to the UK. And even in the UK, like you've just got these bubbles around all of the major cities, and even then they don't always communicate with each other. You got London, which is the main hub, and if anyone wants to get gigs, they move to London and then they move back out. Do you feel like you are part of an international poetry scene, maybe between Australia and New Zealand or further afield than that?
I feel like it's getting there. We definitely have a lot of. We're bringing a lot of international guests in. I think we have Mark Gonzalez at the moment, who's in town. I'm not sure if he's still in Sydney, but he's coming down to Melbourne. I know he's going to be here on the 5th, so that's on tomorrow. Wait, is that tomorrow? That's tomorrow. And he's a very accomplished and established spoken word artist and activist. We've had people like Amir Suleiman. We've had Sarah Kay, Phil Kay.
Yeah.
We've had Anis Majgani. We've had Ken Arkine, Kerry Radzinski. We've had a lot of people come down. A lot of people come down. And it definitely builds the network. Like, I performed alongside Ken Arkine, and then I went to the States and visited Denver, and he welcomed me with open arms because we'd had that conversation before, you know, like we'd already performed together, we'd already gotten to know each other slightly. Same with, you know, Sarah Kay. I performed for her, which is a long, hilarious story in itself. A friend and I proposed to her via poetry, and so when I went to the States, and she happened to be featuring. So she did a little zip and lock kind of thing. So I took it as a yes, and so I went to the States to pursue it. And it turns out she was featuring the week before I was at the same venue. So I did a bit of an open mic and a sacrificial poem before she got up, and she kind of poked her head out the side and went, "Is that Abdul? I can hear an Australian voice. What's going on?" And we kind of caught up, and it was like a reunion kind of thing. And I managed to take a photo and stuff it in the face of the partner that I had in that poem when we were proposing to her. So checkmate, I win. As far as the international slam is concerned, like as far as the international scene is concerned, I feel like we're getting there. Being this far away makes things very difficult. We are one of the furthest countries from anything else. Yeah. It's ridiculous, you know, like we're so far from the UK, we are so far from the US. So we really do operate within the Australia, New Zealand, and, you know, the Southeast Asia kind of area, Pacific kind of, you know, like that, those kinds of areas. Branching out from that is expensive, you know, like this is the first online poetry kind of thing that I've ever heard of, and I love the initiative because it definitely saves me a hell of a lot of money, you know, than a ticket to go to the States. So yeah, this is what's going to make it, like this is what's going to turn us and every other country in the world that participates into this international collective poetry identity. Whereas at the moment it's really based on a phone call or a recorded video that you send overseas, or you go there and you tour yourself. So not exactly accessible to everybody. So yeah, we're getting there as far as the guests are concerned, and then this is what's going to, you know, cherry on the cake.
Thanks very much for the compliment. It's nice to know that, you know, people really do support the work that we're doing. Oh gosh, I had another question about international scenes, and it slightly slipped my mind. Yeah, I was going to ask just what more do you think we could do to try and encourage that kind of international collaboration? I don't know, in Australia, is it pretty tight knit, or are there separated communities there as the same as in the UK, or is it a pretty tight knit community?
So it's tight knit in the fact that anybody knows each other. You know, like you just reeled off a whole bunch of names of poets, and I knew every single one of them. You know, like I know them. Yeah. I'm friends with them. It's not just like I know who they are. I am friends with them. So it's very tight knit in the fact that if you're a poet and you've put yourself out there, you've got a whole bunch of other friends who are poets. You know, a good quarter of my friends on Facebook, for example, are all poets, which are a lot of poets. And but as far as the communities are concerned, I do find that there is, for example, like there is the Melbourne scene and there is the Sydney scene, and there are differences. And we are only just starting to kind of intersect. Mark Gonzalez is going to be, from what I know, the first time that a whole bunch of Sydney poets will come down here and perform. And every now and then, you know, for example, Luca's gone up to perform in Sydney. I'm hoping to go soon as well. You know, every now and then we'll trade kind of thing. But I do really, really want to see integration, you know, kind of really large scale, everyone together. Let's just do a Melbourne-Sydney Connect and call it that. Like I really want to put the word out there that we are connecting like that. So I'll probably get to work on that soon. I think, yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be a good idea to kind of bring that together. And I mean, then there's the Brisbane scene in Queensland, and there must be an Adelaide scene. You know, I just don't know about them. You know, I know like one or two Brisbane poets. There must be a scene though, otherwise they wouldn't exist in that area. So there's people to meet and work to be done. That's for sure.
Yeah, like obviously the main thing in Europe was having conversations about, the infrastructure isn't there. There isn't an international poetry organization that can organize those cross-country things.
Yeah,
In terms of helping you guys be part of an international scene, what you need is cheaper flights, isn't it? Really, it's just
precisely.
yeah, it's interesting that you have these problems that can be solved through people coming together, and you also have these really phenomenal geographic barriers that require like new thinking about how you can connect across long distances, because there's just that kind of change is going to take a long time, and it's going to be really, really more difficult for you to connect with like the scene in Europe than it is ever going to be for the UK, regardless of the amount of infrastructure there. Yeah, I think it's interesting to be exposed to different problems and think about different solutions.
Yeah.
I've got another question for you, which is how do you feel online media has affected spoken word? How do you feel it's affected the way we create it, the way we collaborate with it, and the way we distribute our poetry? Distribution being probably the easiest one to talk about, because it's been pretty revolutionary in that respect.
I think your question has come at a very, very good time. April is Poetry Month, and so I got a page started on Facebook called The Dirty 30 for Poetry Month, where we're encouraging people to write one poem a day, every single day, for the month of April. So you end up with 30 poems. And
Goodness me, hang on. There's something in Britain called you may have heard of NaNoWriMo possibly, which is National Novel Writing Month. It's a thing that's between the US and here. That's in November, but there has been a spin-off version called NaPoWriMo, which is National Poetry Writing Month, and it is literally exactly what you've just described.
I think it's because it's fairly popular for it to be in April. I know that the US has it in April.
Yeah.
I don't even know whether it's officially like Poetry Month in April in Australia, but there's a chance we could just copy the US and follow in their footsteps. But I remember taking part in it last year, and so this year I started the page, and I think I added personally about 70 people, kind of thing, like 70 of my own friends who are poets to write. And right now we are at over 300 people. So 300 poets, 300 writers, some of them emerging, some of them brand new, never written before in their lives, some of them established. Every single one of them, well, no, not every single one of them, I'd love to say every single one of them, but a lot of them, enough to make it really, really difficult to read at 3 o'clock in the morning, are writing one poem or one piece or one line or something every single day. And
that's utterly phenomenal, my friend.
It's great. It's really, really great. So that's one way that it's kind of, as far as the online, this is bringing us together. There is a UK poet, one of them, one of which I know at least. I'm not sure if there are others that haven't made themselves known, but there's one UK poet who's on the page, a whole bunch of New Zealanders, a whole bunch of Aussies, some Americans, there's a lot of people, and then it's just about making it interesting, like I'm posting a video or something like that, some kind of theme to get people, to get the juices moving, if they are struggling to write. I'm doing like a pick of the day kind of thing, and this is my favorite poem from today, and just getting people to kind of, set the bar or whatever it is, leaving as many comments as possible to try and encourage people.
Yeah.
But this is what's kind of bringing us together. I mean, this is besides the whole YouTube phenomenon where that's how we're getting our faces and our videos and our gestures and our words out there in a way that isn't writing. And then there's obviously writing books and chapbooks and online publications and articles and whatever that's, being sent out all over the world. This for me, considering it came 4 days before this interview was the first time that I had kind of been exposed to an international effort at writing together, at being poetry together. So
Yeah.
this would be the next step up. So yeah, it's
Honestly,
overwhelming. That's for sure.
this is really worth having more of a discussion about because the whole concept of Pangea poetry has always been it's not really about competition at all. What it's about is community, and what you've built there is like, again, another online platform for online collaboration. It's really great. I'm sure that I can tell like everyone participating in the slam and like all of the UK poets in NaPoWriMo to go and join that group, and we can
Yeah,
build this really truly international platform where people are just writing together. This has got me really
yeah,
really excited. I think we'll have to have a talk after this interview, probably just
for
about
sure.
that stuff.
For sure. Hey man,
Yeah,
if you got poet friends that want to write, you just let them know about the page. I'm sure you can find me on Facebook.
yeah,
Find
yeah.
the
I will.
page and
Don't worry.
get some more people on it because
Yeah.
300 people is not enough, and I say that sarcastically. So,
No, it honestly isn't. Like, just build it and build it until it becomes this real
exactly.
self-sustaining thing. That's awesome. Congratulations, man. Well done on doing that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I imagine it's giving you a headache, but still, 300 people in 3 days. Bloody hell, man. Good job. Um,
It's growing.
Wicked. I've got a few more questions for you. We're coming up to the end of the interview now. Thanks for what's been a really
So,
great discussion about
of
poetry and
course.
where it's going in Australia. Um, I asked you earlier what the best piece of advice you ever received was. I'm going to tell you what the best piece of advice I ever received was now. I was lucky enough to be mentored by a poet called Kim Trusty, who was really, really great Canadian poet who's since moved back. So I was lucky to have her expertise while she was here. And the best piece of advice she gave me was write about what terrifies you. Which again is what you were talking about. Put yourself in outside of that comfort zone. That's how you're going to grow as
Yeah,
a writer. But
yeah,
also, write about the things that you're scared to talk about. Write about
sure.
those things that that make you a little bit squeamish and a little bit petrified of a what the audience is going to be thinking, and b a little bit petrified of yourself and a little bit scared of the writing.
hmm
Is there ever a piece you've written that really terrified you?
Um, yeah, yeah. For me, the easiest thing to write about was, I mean, it started out as something that terrified me, and then became something that was so normal, and that was war. Um, Being from the Middle East, and having been there during conflict and everything, like stuck in the middle of it, kind of thing, out in the streets in the middle of.
Sorry, I don't know if you just had the same problem I did, but like my entire thing just like shut down.
Just shut
Apparently,
down. Yeah,
broadcast. So I think we can just carry on with that question.
I
So
think so.
what
I'll start again if it makes it easier to kind of chop and whatever. So,
Yeah, that would be great.
um,
So what
yeah. So the
terrifies you?
most the most difficult, sorry, the easiest thing for me to write about right now is war. It started out as something that was really really difficult for me to write about. I'm from Lebanon, which is in the Middle East, and it's a war torn country. It's absolutely it's unrecognizable from what it was 50 years ago. And being in the middle of that, going during the conflict and staying during the conflict and walking around during the conflict, seeing all that was terrifying in itself. It was eye-opening in itself for someone who was becoming a man. This was when I was like 16, 18, that kind of thing, like just starting
Wow,
to
you
find
moved older than
manhood.
I thought you had.
Sorry?
You moved older than I thought you had.
Oh no no no! I hadn't. I mean, I went and stayed there for a little bit. Like it was just a visit,
Oh, okay.
But it was such a action-packed kind of visit. Like it was so much to see in one visit that it was. It feels like you've been there for a few years. That's for sure. And experiencing all of that definitely changed the way I wrote. I wasn't doing petty love poems anymore. That was stupid. And I wasn't doing, little things like that. I was writing about this profound war. All of a sudden, it was terrifying to write about because it's so difficult to give war justice, which is an ironic sentence in itself. And so I started to delve into that and to write about that. And eventually, it just became something so normal to me. Like I was building on the anger, and I was, monopolizing on the hatred, and I was turning it into something that I was comfortable with. It was really, really easy to be angry at the people who were killing us, and it was really, really easy to be, hateful and spiteful towards politics and towards tyranny and towards, civil war and that kind of thing. It was easy. Like, it became so easy to write a poem about that, and it was just really, really funny to kind of stand back and be like, wow, now what scares me to write about is peace. Now what scares me is pointing the finger at somebody other than the other, someone besides the other. So that's kind of the move that I made, and that was the first, in my opinion, good piece that I wrote and that I performed. It was the only one that I'm proud of on YouTube. It's kind of, it was me looking at the Arab situation here in Australia and how I know them and how I experience them and where they've come from, like what's made them who they are, and should we be proud of that?
Yeah.
It's, and it ends with me asking the question, like, who's the real invader? Who's the real oppressor now? Is it the other anymore, or is it us? And that was a very, very difficult thing for me to write. So that's kind of what terrified me, and that's what I'm trying to move into. I'm trying to write about peace now. I'm trying to write about happiness. I'm trying to write about the good side of my country and of my area and that kind of thing. And that's different. Someone who's always liked to call myself a war poet, a political poet, an activist poet, by some definitions of the word activist. It's definitely difficult for me to kind of change that and write about love and write about peace and what effect they could have on us. It's the whole Monsters Inc. is screaming better than laughter. What's going to power the world more? And I guess I chose laughter, and so I'm trying to build on that.
Bold choice. It was really interesting hearing you talk about like the idea of an other. Here in Birmingham, the spoken word scene is very linked to activism and political stances, and it's something I've always shied away from a little bit, and I don't know why. And I recently came to the mild conclusion that, to me, activism has always implied some kind of antagonist, right? It's always implied some type of other that you're rallying against. And in my experience here, this may be a little bit controversial, talking to somebody who's actually experienced war and conflict, which obviously we haven't had real conflict here in the UK, but the real enemy here in terms of political stuff isn't this evil other, it's the apathy of people, and coming to terms with the fact that no amount of strong activist thinking might not be enough to change the apathetic. You have to come from a place of understanding and understand why people feel that way, and be still subversive but not aggressive in the way that you challenge that apathy. And how do you bring about change if a movement is motivated by drawing that line and saying here's an other? How do you make lasting change if it's constantly about division rather than cohesion?
Sure. Yeah, I feel that. I definitely feel that. I was having a very, very similar conversation with Amal, who I'm assuming you'll be interviewing soon. She's a very established activist in the US for the conflict in Syria, and we were definitely having this conversation where what does activism need to be? What does it need to become? And it was, you are absolutely right. you're absolutely right. How effective can we be as activists if if our tool for activism is hatred? You can hate all you want. The other, the person that you are against, it's not going to die from hatred. They're not going to go away from the hatred. They're not going to disappear because of the hatred. They're going to disappear because of the activism. There's got to be action. You have to do something. You can't just. It's not as simple as posting a status, a really angrily worded letter. It's not that simple. You really have to work on your own people. So for we really came to this conclusion where it's not bad to hate sometimes. I know I definitely can't just say that I love all the time. If I see something terrible, I have to hate it. It's necessary. It keeps us human. And anger is something that's also necessary, but I think the metaphor that I gave was, it's like fluoride, fluoride in water. They add it to the water system, and that's fair, but it is essentially poisonous. Add too much of it, you're going to kill someone. Or you add the 1 part per how many, thousands or millions or whatever it is, and that's what is going to keep it clean and good for you, and whatever it is that they will have us believe. So that's what hatred and anger have to be. Certain things are defined by moderation differently than others. Happiness, also has to be had in moderation. You can't always be happy all the time, but you can be more happy more of the time than you should be angry and sad and hateful and spiteful. So you can't just define moderation by one standard and say that we're going to be 50% of the time sad and hateful and angry. We're going to be happy the other 50% of the time. You can't do that. You really do have to try and maintain as much happiness as possible while still, pinching yourself, just checking that you're human by being angry at something bad. And that's what's going to make us better. If we're just stuck in the apathy, if we're stuck in the spite, if we're stuck in the hatred, we're not going to go anywhere. We are not going to progress.
Yeah, definitely.
We may topple the other. We may make the other disappear, but it's just going to lead to us becoming the other for someone else, and it's just going to be this vicious cycle. So,
definitely.
Yeah,
that's
what
I was talking to another British poet, an activist, definitely more of an activist and politically minded person than I am, about the nature of poetry being political, and whether or not it's kind of lost its teeth a little bit, particularly in Birmingham, or just in the UK, coming from this place where it was a very politically motivated thing initially. It was coming from, it was this voice of the voiceless, where it was being used to offer communities, this voice that wasn't available to them. They couldn't voice their opinions in the mainstream ways. Poetry wasn't backed by the Poetry Society then. Spoken word was this very underground urban thing, whereas now, as it's become more accepted, has it become soft as well? Has the act of poetry become too nice? Is it still political if you are performing it in a room full of 80 people who share the exact same opinions as you? Is that still activism, or has it just become a little bit self-indulgent? And is it active to an angry rant on Facebook? I don't know. I think it does have value, particularly in the way it can raise awareness of issues, particularly online when you're putting it out there. But yeah, acts need to come out of it, and I think poetry can be an act, and I think the act of giving people spaces to express themselves, it is political. But I don't know, I wonder if sometimes we might be forgetting where it's come from, and whether or not we have a duty to try to keep to that subversive nature of what's spoken.
I have no doubt. I have no doubt it's losing its potency sometimes, and its original meaning sometimes. I have no doubt of that whatsoever. And that's going back to what we were talking about, this need for emerging poets or for new communities to want to jump out and be somewhere else, to expose themselves and that kind of thing, where that's what's going to change our stance, if we are stuck doing exactly what you're saying, performing our political views to a room full of however many people, if they all have the same views as us, are we learning? We need to have somebody, despite the fact that we disagree with them, we need to have somebody shake our dust. Like get up there and say, this is my view, and you can take it or leave it, but this is my view, and screw you if you don't like it. It's gonna tick us off. It's going to really, really irritate us, and we're gonna hate that person for it. But
We're
that's
gonna
what
need it.
that's
Yeah.
what politics is. It's a debate. You can't. It's not going to be politics if it's just your view and your view only. That's tyranny. That's dictatorship. It's not politics anymore. And so there needs to be that constant questioning of ourselves. And I think making poetry, making anything international, is what aids in cutting off that line. Cutting that umbilical cord to what you're used to, and giving you the ability to walk freely and to be your
Yeah.
own person. So you can talk about oppression all you want if you live in the UK or in Australia or in the US, or poverty or whatever. Go to India, what do
Yeah.
you think of it now? Go see somebody who's happy living in poverty, who's completely happy with it and has no remorse for it whatsoever. Now, what do you think of it? Meet somebody who's angry at it. Now, what do you think of it? And it needs to be this constant change, this constant difference. You can't make a difference if you don't see difference. It's that simple. So, yeah,
Oh,
that's
that is a gorgeous line. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's where activism needs to go. That's where politics needs to go.
Yeah, definitely. I think um, I'll ask you something that I'm not even sure you'll have an answer to. Obviously, you've mentioned your friends in the States representing Syria, and obviously you're from Lebanon. Spoken word in the Arabic world, is that a thing? And is that something we should be more connected to? Are the voices that we're hearing just from people who have like moved out of those places? Are there voices in that part of the world that we need to be paying attention to, and how do we find them?
Well, I'm sure. I mean, I know that there's one. I just can't remember her name. Like she speaks, like she does her poetry in Arabic and everything, which I think is fantastic, because I'm still stuck in the sometimes English, sometimes Arabic, half here, half there. I don't feel like I've mastered the language enough for it to be more than just conversational, and to perform it in like solely just Arabic in my piece. But she performs solely in Arabic, and I can't for the life of me remember her name, but I'm sure Emma would know, because she was the one who said it to me. But there are plenty of Arab voices in general outside the Middle East, who frequent the Middle East, who go back very, very often, and perform there. There are lots of voices from there. I mean, I guess I would consider myself one of them. I would consider Emma one of them. There's people like Omar Effendim, who are crazy. There's Loki, who I'm pretty sure is from the UK. He's an insane, UK-based rapper who represents the Middle East to an extent. And even if you look at things like Brave New Voices, and even deaf poetry, like there's Suhair Hamad, who is such a like goosebump giving poet when she talks about the Middle East, and about the situation in the States being Middle Eastern. These are all. It's really. I mean, I'm sure if you just typed in Middle East poet, or Arab poet, or Lebanon poet, or Syria poet, whatever it is, you'd. As the beauty of being online is that you can really write any keywords and you find something. There's someone out there who's doing something that you're looking for. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's just a matter of finding the right keywords.
Oh, yeah, that's great. I think I'm gonna have to go and check some of that out now. It's only
Yeah.
really while I've been doing this competition, and it's been highlighted to me that just how political Poetry Word started out and how political it still needs to be, that I've even started thinking about these things. I do worry about the level of context that emerging poets particularly are exposed to, about where the form has come from and its political roots, and it is possible to, start your career, but also just have a career inside of a bubble, where it is just safe, and you'll start out on the open mics, and then you'll get onto some residency program, and you will tour gigs in your country, and that will feel like enough, and that will feel like the life of a poet, when it can be and should be so much more than that. I think, yeah, it's something we've got to stay conscious of, I hope, and I have no doubt that we will, simply because as a scene we're too aware of it to let it get that far out of hand. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Be
encouraging to
be
know
be
that.
very very cautious with that. I was the kind of person who thought that we all need to become this and become that, and there's the whole Martin Luther King kind of speech, like I have a dream and I want to see people like this and whatever it is. But keep in mind, the world is based on opposites, and there needs to be people who operate in a bubble. There need to be people who operate outside the bubble, because otherwise one isn't defined by the other. And there needs to be, all of us were just socially aware, if all of us were politically aware, if all of us just had our head in the clouds and so good at what we do, then who's left looking at the obstacle on the ground in front of us? Who's left checking for what we trip on? So
Yeah.
there needs to be people who are looking down, there needs to be people who are looking up. Both are completely necessary, despite the fact that we may disagree with those people who are looking on the ground, and I'm sure that they disagree with us because we have a head in the clouds. In the end, if we work together and we just let everyone be and move forward like that, we'll hopefully get somewhere without falling over or hitting our heads on passing blimp. This analogy is going way off topic, but you get the
No,
idea.
no. Yeah, yeah, you managed it pretty well. Really well said. I think the interview is probably wrapping up to a close now. It's 1 a.m. here
Yeah.
in the UK,
Oh,
and I want
that
to
time
get me
of
some
to
sleep
sleep.
before work.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a few light questions to end things off. If you had to get a line of poetry tattooed to your head, what would it be?
Uh,
You've had a long
um,
time to prepare for this question.
Even I wasn't thinking about it. I was supposed to think about politics. That is a great question. Um, Good God. I would say, simply because I can't think of anything else. Um, oh, hang on. I got this. I got this. Just give me like 2 seconds to think about it, because I know this line. I just have to collect it in my head. Um, so there's a poem. One of the first poems that I ever watched was by a guy named Reeves, and he has a poem called Sign Language, and he talks about these hearing impaired kids that he was teaching, and he does this whole poem that's got some deepness, like some depth and some lightheartedness and some humor and whatever it is, but it ends, and I'm hoping I'm recalling it correctly, um, where he's speaking from the perspective of one of these deaf children. Um, I was born as deaf and as dumb as a starfish, but if I was born a man, I would thank God every day at the top of my king lungs to thank him for giving me voice. I think that's what I'd get tatted on my forehead.
It's a pretty
Yeah,
good line.
the most hilarious thing ever.
I'm gonna have to go
I
away
think it
and
just reminded me. Every time
yeah.
I look in the mirror of the bad mistake that I made of getting a tattoo on my forehead, and then the fact that I have a voice and that I should use it.
No, fair enough. Last question for you. This is a little bit of a Marmite question. Some people love it and have an answer ready. Some people hate it and want to do nothing but strangle me when I ask it.
Okay.
What is poetry to you?
Ah,
There's the
Carl,
Marmite.
Carl. Poetry to me is the child who breaks out of what he thinks is English, what he thinks is speaking, what he thinks is, the concept of language in general, and claiming it for himself. Because too often, growing up in an education, in an institution, we are told what language is supposed to be and how it sounds like. So for me, poetry is the kid that first discovers spoken word, and that he can do it himself, and that he can say it the way that he wants to say it, and using that to claim the language for himself, to be who he wants to be through English, because it's his English and nobody else's. It's making language his treasure, and it applies to anybody from who speaks any language, obviously. But for me, poetry is that moment where he's skeptical about what he's writing the whole time, and he hates himself for doing this, and he wishes he could escape the class, and he wishes he didn't have to do this anymore. And he's forced to get up on stage by me because I can tell that he's scared of what he's about to say. And then he's forced to read what he has to say. And everybody claps, and everybody loves it, and everybody treats him better because of it. And he realizes that the language that he has is not what he was taught. That for me, that moment, that look on his face is poetry.
That's probably my favorite answer to that question. Thank you very much for that.
Yes.
Yeah, that about wraps up the interview, and I don't want to spoil what you've said with anything else. Really great interview, Abdul. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks a lot.